Good evening. This is the Wolfeboro Planning Board meeting for Tuesday, April 16th. Calling to order. The first order of business is an introduction of the Planning Board members. I'm Doug Breskin, the chairperson. To my left is Steve Webster, vice chair, Peter Goodwin, Roger Murray, and to my right, Kathy Barnard, Brad Harriman, the selectman representative, and Julie Jacobs. We have no public hearings this evening. The first discussion item is a preliminary consultation for development on Route 109A, tax map 161-015, 161-016, and 175-011, which comprises 4 buildings with 45 residential units in each building for a total of 180 units at 40 foot tall. Randy?
Thank you. My name is Randy Walker. I work for Walker & Varney here in Wolfeboro. I'm here tonight with Anthony Bonacorso, who owns Bonacorso Construction and Development LLC, which has the Quimby property under agreement. Also here with Chris Berry from Berry Surveying and Engineering to answer any technical questions that we may have. So the purpose of our hearing this evening is to present some plans to you as to what the developer would like to do on the property. And we are very hopeful to get full and frank and constructive feedback as to the viability of this project. And if the board is not in favor of it, we would like to know that sooner, obviously, than later. But our goal is to try to get a pulse on how the board feels about this project. So the property itself is the Quimby property on Route 109A. It's owned by Richard and Diane Quimby's Trust. It's comprised of 92 acres, 3 lots. They've all been fully surveyed. And as you mentioned, they're tax mapped 175-11, 161-15, and 161-16. The plan is to merge those 3 lots into one monolithic 92-acre lot. This property, as you can see from the plans in front of you, is located behind Winnipesaukee Lumber, now Hancock Lumber, behind the SAU School District, behind the GI Plastique, behind Eastern Propane. So in sum, it's in the woods. It's accessible to the town, but it's also quite remote. The frontage on this property, it has frontage in 4 different locations on Route 109A. The plan is to have one primary entrance in and out, but they do have 4 different possibilities. From a topography standpoint, the property is fairly flat, all forested. There is some wetlands, but it's all vacant. It has never been built on, so we're dealing with virgin territory. The zoning districts are 2. We're in the residential district and the Pine Hill Road Development District. But more importantly, the overlay district, which is the multi-family housing, applies to this and I believe supersedes the other 2. From a historical perspective, I came before this board 2 years ago with a slightly different project, but on this property. And the plan then was to have 2 45-unit buildings and 90 manufactured housing sites. I believe that proposal was warmly received by this board. We then went to the TRC. That was also warmly received. Then we went to the Zoning Board of Adjustment and applied for a number of variances, all of which that we needed were granted. But that's where that project ended. The cost to build that project were just prohibitive, particularly the 90-unit manufactured housing park. The infrastructure costs were just too much. So we're coming back with a new, I believe, improved project. It has the same density, 180 units, but instead of having it sprawled out with 90 manufactured housing units and 2 45-unit buildings, we're proposing 4 45-unit buildings, again, for a total of 180. When I say units, I mean apartments, and I will use those interchangeably going forward. There's not an intent to condominiumize or sell these off. These will be rental units. The benefit of clustering 4 buildings in a localized area is sort of obvious. There's more green space, more woods, more forest, less roads, less soil disturbance, less asphalt, more pervious soil, less impervious soil. A greater buffer is allowed around the perimeter. And to build the buildings, it's cheaper to build buildings that are clustered like this. It's also cheaper to maintain them over the long term, and particularly from an energy efficient standpoint. To have 45 units in a building are much easier to heat and cool than to have 45 separate, homes spread out. So there'll be a smaller carbon footprint, less pollution, and all the advantages of clustering, which is why I suspect that this board has encouraged people not to do conventional subdivisions anymore, but to do a conservation subdivision, to cluster homes together so that there's more green space. This is the same philosophy, the same concept, it's just we're applying it to buildings. The buildings are proposed to be roughly 75 feet wide, 240 feet long, 45 units in a building, 3 bedrooms, just to give you an idea of what the concept might be like. These would all be residential apartments, nothing commercial. It's not the developer's intent to build and flip this property. Their business model is to build, keep, and rent for decades. 100% of the apartments, the plan is to have long-term rentals, 0 short-term rentals. They prefer one-year leases, prefer actually longer. The quality of this development, they would lean on the side of having a premium development rather than a discount development. So on above average in quality for the units themselves. These would be open to the market. They're not planning on restricting it to over 55, not planning on having affordable housing in that traditional sense, not planning on having workforce housing. These are market-based units is the proposal. So no subsidized units at all. It's not shown on the plan, but they would like to put a clubhouse somewhere on it so that people could come together, have a meeting area, social gathering area, relax, have a TV there, have a gym on site. The plan is not just to have them sleep in these buildings and go to work, but to come back and enjoy this property and enjoy the property. The building locations themselves, as you can see, are ensconced in the woods. We don't believe they will be visible from the road, or if they are visible, they will be minimally so. If you drive by GI Plastique, for example, that's a big building. Even though it's fairly close, you really can't see it. The closest building is proposed to be 500 feet plus away from Route 109A, so setback off the road and, again, not up front. And to me, a couple of examples of what this might be like, I pick Harriman Hill right down the street. Wonderful development. You don't even know that it's there. You drive by, it's invisible. You go to the north of this property to Sugar Hill, similarly, great project, great facility. You don't even know that it's there. I'll pick one more. Birchill Estates Manufactured Housing Park has over 100 units in it. You don't know that it's even there. All 3 of those, all front on state highways like this one would. You don't even know that they're there from a traffic perspective. You drive by, you very rarely see somebody coming out. There's never even 2 cars waiting, even on the busiest of days to get in and out. We believe this project, being on a state highway, will have a similar effect, which will be minimal. I don't think there's any doubt that we have a need for housing. When I came before this board 2 years ago, they indicated that there was a need for housing. I don't think that's changed, or if it has changed, it's even worse now. We have more of a need for housing than we had in the past. And I'll give 2 specific examples. One, our office. We have 10 people in our office. 2 of us now live in Wolfeboro. 2 people commute from Concord every day. 1 from Holderness, 2 from Ossipee, 1 from Wakefield, 1 from New Durham, and 1 from Brookfield. We have some staff members that we pay fairly well. They cannot find housing in Wolfeboro. So over the weekend, I Googled Wolfeboro rentals, and I had a bevy of rentals pop up, all short-term rentals, $109 a night, $600 a night, I think was on the high side, and just pages and pages. So I refined my search a little bit, And I said, how about long-term Wolfeboro rentals? All the short terms pop up on that as well, and you can't find any long-term rentals. Very difficult. Story number two, my wife and I, 2 years ago, well, for the last 20 years, we've had a downtown apartment that we rented out and had a long-term tenant in it, and that tenant left and moved closer to their children. They get up into their 80s and decided to move near their children, and the apartment became vacant, and I just went online to see what it might cost to rent that. Couldn't find anything in Wolfeboro other than Harriman Hill, which I called, and they said there was a waiting period, and I'm told that there's roughly a 1-year waiting period to get in there, and you have to qualify for an income perspective. So the only thing I could find was a house on Crescent Lake for $4,000 a month. I told my wife, I think we can get $2,000 a month for an apartment plus utilities. And she said, Randy, you live in this town, you work in this town, that's too much money. $1,600, I think, would be fair. So I'm now negotiating with my wife, on what the rental might be. So we compromised on $1,800, ran an ad in the paper. Within 6 hours, we had over a dozen calls. Within a day, we were over 24, and weeks would go by, and I was still getting calls later. That's the kind of demand that we have in Wolfeboro. It's significant. These buildings will put a dent in that demand, but it won't solve the problem. It'll help, but it won't solve the problem because we need even more. So what's the neighborhood like around these properties? Well, we have the sewage treatment plant on one side, covered by forest. We have Eastern Propane, we have the stump dump, GI Plastique, Wickers, the SAU building for the school, Winnipesaukee Lumber, Goodhue Boat Storage, and a few residential homes on Route 109A. I think there's 3 or 4 homes there, and of course across the street, the Pine Hill Cemetery. So it's a perfect place for a residential area. You get 90 acres to build this complex, much like, again, Sugar Hill, Harriman Hill, or Berkshire Estates, the same type of idea. And one of the questions that I would ask the board to ask, if it's not here, then where? Where else in town? To me, this is a perfect location. It was perfect 2 years ago, but unfortunately, the cost with the business plan just didn't fly. So we have a couple of specific questions that I'd like to ask the board, and that is, bottom line, do you have an appetite for this project? Would the planning board be supportive of this project? We know tonight it's just conceptual. No, it's not binding, but it would be very helpful if the board is not inclined to do it, to let us know that. And if it is inclined to approve it, then we can go forward with the next step. Now, it's my belief that we're in the multifamily, the multifamily section of the ordinance applies, which supersedes the requirements in both the residential and the Pine Hill development districts. And one of the things is, and it's sort of a threshold issue for the developer, is we need 180 units. They have 92 acres. The density, according to the multifamily section, says that you can have 2 units per acre. That'd give us 184. We're looking for 180, backing that down. So that does require it be served by municipal water and sewer. We do plan on tying into the water system. And a couple of years ago, we'd worked out a plan to be served by the municipal system, but the engineers will have to work out how that practically would go. But we would have to qualify for that to go forward. So we believe we would comply with the density requirements based on 175, 143 of the ordinance, which would allow us to have 4 45-unit buildings. We're aware that we would need at least 2 variances, one for the height, and the second one, because we would have more than 5 units in a building, we would need a variance for that. The zoning board 2 years ago did grant a variance for that for 2 buildings on the site, and we hope that they would be favorably disposed to do it again, except for 4 buildings. So basically, that's what the proposal is. I think Anthony might like to say a few things, as well as Chris, but if you have any questions of me particularly, I'd be happy to answer those. Roger.
I just have one initial question, and that is that this plan seems to show 3 buildings.
So that plan shows 3 60-unit buildings.
Okay.
The same Idea was to have 4, and again, we're in the discussion stages, so they've obviously bounced back and forth. I think they'd prefer 3 60-unit buildings, although they would have to be 4 or 5 stories. And definitely would be over the height, but you're
So
right.
this is really kind of what we're talking about, the 4-unit?
Yes, and again, it's still in the discussion stages, but the goal is to have the 180 one way or another, although frankly, they'd prefer 3 60-unit buildings if they could do that. Fair to say.
Could you explain a little bit more why you are not considering some workforce or affordable housing in this development, especially since you may be able to get a density if you go with the inclusionary zoning regulation?
Well, again, Anthony may be better answer that question, but I'll just say this, that we believe we qualify for density with the 92 acres and having 2 units an acre under the multifamily. And that would be a good business number. And then to make this project viable, of course, the more soft costs we have up front, the longer it takes to develop and build out, it hurts you on the backside. And you know, for this project to be viable, their business model is to have it be market-based.
Thank you.
What would be the build-out schedule for this? As in, you build one and it doesn't fill up, do you build the others?
Not right now.
I defer to Anthony on that. You want to?
Good evening, members of the board. Thank you for having me and listening to our proposal. It's a great question. I would address that the only way to ever build a project like this is, in this type of scale, is it's all at once. You can't build one building and then wait a year or 2 and do the next. Everything would be done as soon as we break ground. We have a construction schedule roughly between 34 and 38 months, start to finish, with the entire project. And then we would continue and phase it in terms of leasing them and occupying them while we're under construction. That's very typical of what will happen. As one building is going up, the other building in the foundation would begin, so we would just continue to overlap and rotate. And to address your question, we are very open to the concept of adding affordable rate units if there is a density increase, and take advantage of that program that you had mentioned. It's back to what Mr. Walker had stated, that projects of this nature, as you can see, just even buying a dozen of eggs, how expensive things are. Very, very expensive. So there has to be a minimum of which unit count that would allow this project to be successful. So we were looking at the 180 units, trying to minimize the footprint. And Roger, to your point about the 3 or 4 buildings, the way it's with the 4 buildings, it would be 3 living stories. If this were to continue and the board would be open to it, we would entertain the ability to go 4 living stories in 3 buildings to minimize the impact and the footprint of the surroundings and the environment. So it depends on the amount of stories. I do have some photos that might help give an example of what something like that may look like. If I may, Peter, if you have a question, I'd be happy to address it.
I guess my thinking is that we are a rural area, and there is the idea that you want to sort of live with nature. And to me, a 4-story building is not going to be, quote, living with nature. 3 may be a stretch. And, you know, so the idea you'd be more efficient if you ended up building just 3 and with 4 stories rather than 4 with 3 stories. It says that you're moving in, to me, the wrong direction for what Wolfeboro sort of looks like and what people want to live in here.
It depends also on the structure, the architecture of the building, what harmonizes with that. And part of the process when we are developing, we do like to engage with the community. This is always much more friendly when we can interact of what would be the best approach to do that. And doing that would be having a plan where we would address the architectural part of the project. First, it's the general outlay and the footprint, talk about the architecture. Then at a later date as a project, as we discuss it, we talk about all the engineering, the water, sewer, fire, police, traffic, financial impact. All that is done, I would think, a little further down the road, but all of that will absolutely be addressed. But for the purposes of this meeting is conceptually, if the town is on board with having units, and Randy had mentioned it loosely, of affordable, if you think of owning a single-family home, what that costs, paying the taxes, having insurance, mowing the lawn, plowing the driveway, doing this, the maintenance and everything else, a lot of people are done with it. The trend now is changing a bit where some of the younger people may not want to have a home, they don't know where they're going to live yet, and maybe they need a nice environment where they can start out. Along with the empty nesters, maybe they're done with having the home and doing all that. They want something that is easy for them, easier living. These buildings will have elevators so it can accommodate handicapped. Everything is self-contained. Mm-hmm. The resources of the town when it comes to plowing the roads or trash removal, irrigation, all of that, it's not on the town, it's on the project. So in that regard, it doesn't deplete any of the resources of the town. If anything, it's a financial benefit because of all the other benefits, the taxes, the jobs that it will create, in just having people in the area that can fulfill the need for employment, hospitals, schools, and whatnot. So we've looked at this extensively as to what is the best way to approach housing crisis that we have. And we're finding that this model of the multifamily clustering has been accepted and well received by multiple communities across the country, actually. And again, because carbon footprint is much smaller, as Randy mentioned, the amount of energy that it would take to heat and cool these properties are much less than a bunch of single-family homes. If the project was accepted before as 90 single-family homes and another 90 apartments, as again the previous owner applied for, to build something like that, it would take probably 10 years. And to have 90 single-family homes and the amount of traffic and whatnot, we're not looking for that. We completely changed the direction and thinking something like this within 36 months will be done, built, and people will be living in it, producing, again, jobs and again, more resource to the community.
Well, I think that one of the questions that was asked in the previous model where you had all these individual homes was, are they going to fit on this particular piece of property because of the slopes and things like that? And so your present presentation ends up being, to me, perhaps more realistic. And so I think that's a step in the right direction because it's just, there were questions about the topography. And I would also suggest that if you are, my question was, is this affordable? Is this going to have people come and rent and they're actually going to live there? And if you have actually, or if you are making this proposal to us and to build this property or build this group, you obviously have done enough research to say that people will be able to do that and it will be, more affordable than other kinds of houses, and so that would be good for our workforce.
Apartment rentals are much more affordable than owning condominiums or homes, without a doubt. Just imagine your average home, $400,000 or $500,000, putting down 25% of that, along with everything all the expenses that go with it. We're finding that the trend now is people do like the ability to, again, especially empty nesters, like I'm almost one. I have my 17-year-old, he has a few more years, but at that point, having, downsizing a bit is a benefit. It allows people to, maybe they want to travel more, or maybe they just want to have simpler living. So these communities aren't just an apartment, it's really a thriving community where we have amenities. And the amenities are another thing that drive the value and the interest for the people, because they'll have a gym, they'll have an area, maybe there's a pickleball court, maybe there's just walking paths. So those types of things are really sought after. So it allows people to live in an environment where they can enjoy it and they can also work, because we also have business centers within I shouldn't say a center, but business spaces where if somebody wants to work from home, they can, or meet a client and within the community, they can have them there and they can go to a quiet place and do their work as well. So that is definitely part of the model, and we're finding that, again, it's a very, very successful model because these properties they're popping up everywhere for a reason. People gravitate toward it. It's much easier living, it's clean, self-sustained, and it allows the type of quality of finishes that people enjoy, they like. The units that we have are, again, very, very high quality, granite countertops or quartzite, whatever it might be, tiled showers, and I have some pictures of that I would like to share with you so you can get a sense of what some of the spaces may look like.
Well, I guess my point is that if you think you can build this and you're going to be able to rent these places, you've done more research than the planning board has.
Yeah.
And so if you think it's a good deal and is something to go forward with, that probably is good for our community.
I appreciate that. We do have challenges in the next phases. Once we are on board, if we are on board as far as conceptually, then the engineering comes in and to figure out the water, the sewer, the electrical, and all the power and what it will take. And if all those items can be addressed properly, and we find that there is means to address those concerns, then we are absolutely would like to proceed with it, but that there's more engineering that has to be done. Anybody have any other questions?
Have you given any further, or can you expand any more on what you might have investigated with regard to how to handle sewage? I understand the water comes from the town, but I assume you're aware that we are near capacity for our sewage system, and I'm wondering how you might handle that.
That's definitely a question for Chris. He can address that, but if there are any other questions, maybe beside the engineering part.
Could I just get clarification on how many stories these buildings are going to be for the so 3 units versus 3 buildings versus the 4?
So to be in full disclosure, I would prefer to have 3 buildings, 4 stories, because I think it minimizes the footprint of the development. It's one less structure. And Peter, to your point, the topography lends itself where we may be able to do that because the lot slopes, we may be able to do that and mask it a bit. But again, there's more engineering that has to be done. And Roger, again, having the 4 stories versus 3, depending on the roof lines, it's not that significant. This is in such an area, when you see some of the photos, that you can't see this from any area. It's not visible. You will not be able to see the structure from the road. You're not going to be able to see the structure from almost anywhere, unless you're on the rooftop of the other community that's uphill. So not sure yet if whether 3 or 4 or 5 stories for that matter, not that I'm asking for that would even be visible anywhere. And it's such off to the side. It's away from the center of town, 90 acres, plenty of open space. We don't want to disturb anything other than what we need to utilize for the footprint of this. And as far as the sewage question, if we can have it on site with the leaching fields and whatnot, again, that's an engineering question. But I would prefer to try to, and we had a variance for 3 stories, but that's another path we would have to undertake to determine whether it would even be considered.
Well, I think how well it is screened is an important factor. And when I got out my magnifying glass and looked at the plan,
there's a couple things that might help illustrate thing that's behind that. Anthony, would you mind removing that first one?
I would add that, this is a relatively flat piece of property, and the only thing that I would suggest Randy indicated, which is not perhaps correct, is that Sugar Hill is not seen from Route 109A, but is seen from a lot of other places in town. And so therefore, it may end up being more of an eyesore for some people than perhaps your particular construction site.
If something is an eyesore, then it's a structure that's really not appealing. If you have a structure that actually is appealing,
but you're on the flat, you're not going to be seen from anywhere.
Right. So yes, if you could pass those out, please.
When I looked at the topo map,
leave it. Thank you. Sorry.
It looked to me as though Route 109A was at about 610 feet, and where this was going to be built was at like 670.
Yes, but that's definitely.
which if you put up a 40-foot building would mean that the building would be 100 feet above, the roof of the building would be 100 feet above Route 109A.
Not exactly.
Yeah, so your illustration or your example, from the perspective of if you have 100 feet of elevation change right in front of you, that's significant. But we have an elevation change,
A little closer to the microphone.
I'm sorry. So if you're thinking about your example of 100 feet of elevation change on a structure from ground level to rooftop right in front of you, that is significant. But in this particular case, we're at elevation between 600 and 610 on 109A, and the building platforms are around elevation 670, 680, but the closest building is 515 feet away. So if you can imagine, as you're traveling along Route 109A and you have 60 feet of trees sort of in your face, if you have an object that's 515 feet, even at the closest point, that object is not going to be visible despite how tall it is above the ground. Before Anthony takes back over, there was a question about the sewer. So we had many discussions with a former DPW director about sewer, and the preferred method at the time was that we manage our own sewer on our own site, and there would be a level of oversight from the town of Wolfeboro on those systems. So we would design them to a certain standard. We would maintain them, but the town of Wolfeboro would oversee to make sure that they were being managed properly at the applicant's cost. And what that allows us to do is spread the effluent load of our project out over our property and not send that load to the sewage treatment plant, which has certain capacity constraints.
Okay.
How many acres is that particular area that you're going to be dealing with?
That's unknown at the moment. We have multiple ways of approaching the project. Currently, under the former design, we had them loaded in 4 places throughout the site. I think we could probably do a little bit better with this specific project design and load them in various places throughout the project site to spread that load out over the soil mass. So it's more of a horizontal loading instead of a vertical load.
Under the multifamily dwelling ordinance, the requirement is 2 units per acre if you're on municipal water and sewer.
Yep.
But if you're not, then a high-intensity soil survey would determine the density. And do you think you can get your density with a high-intensity soil survey?
We haven't run the high intensity. We've conducted a high-intensity soil survey, which we have. We have not run the calculations that are prescribed in the ordinance, and that's something that we would work through to determine the best route there.
Yeah, I would think you'd want to tie into municipal sewer. Just that seems like a big hurdle. But maybe you've got really good soils there and it works.
Yeah, the issue with capacity at the plant and how to get it there. It seems silly to say because I think you can literally see the plant in my aerial photo, but you can't just shoot it over the mountain and hope it gets there. So.
Could you comment a little on the driveway or roadway?
Sure.
Okay, which is it going to be?
A driveway or a roadway?
Yeah.
With this type of traffic load, it would be a roadway, so it would meet roadway standards. We would propose 24 feet wide, curbing where it's required, sidewalk along the entire alignment so that people could walk basically along the entire alignment. As Anthony alluded, we're trying to create a community and community space, and that's done through various features, architectural features, hardscape features, and amenities that are proposed in the project.
Would this be anything that you'd be looking for in the future for the town to possibly take over that road system in there, or?
We haven't discussed that internally, but we've always approached the project as if this was a private project.
You need a second exit from this property, don't you?
Yes.
Is that the dotted line?
Yes. So previously, we had approached Eastern about an access, secondary fire access through that location. We would re-engage them on that, and if that's not possible or practical for whatever reason, then we would look for a second access out onto Route 109. We would like to avoid that at all costs if possible, but it is an option for us.
I'm not sure how far you want to get into this, but I had some other questions.
Feel free. I drove up.
I have not counted your parking spaces, but I believe under the ordinance you need 240.
We currently have 390 shown on the color rendering that you have before you. That will be whittled down as we create internal landscape islands, ADA spaces, other reasons we would remove parking. So this particular plan has sufficient, in my opinion, sufficient parking, and that also assumes that residents would park in close proximity to the structures, but also had some additional space for the clubhouse.
What about a traffic study? Would you be doing something like that?
Yes,
Traffic study?
we would engage, his name is Kim Hazavardian, who's a traffic engineer at PTOE. This type of study is a little outside of my wheelhouse just due to the volume. And so we would engage Kim to conduct a proper traffic study. NHDOT would require the same. And on a project this size, they would require a pre-meeting, a scoping meeting, and then we would evaluate off-site improvements.
Okay, thank you.
Have you given any consideration to whether the combined 3 lots would have an issue such as with form factor?
I have not.
Okay.
Tavis has mentioned the form factor to me in the past. I always forget that you have that rule here. Just for Anthony's edification, it has to do with the shape and size of the lot, so we may need relief on the form factor.
Okay.
Is there a similar development that you've done that we might be able to visit or see?
There are similar projects that I've designed, and I can certainly give you addresses for those.
And the developer?
And Anthony, I think, is going to prepare or provide a presentation of some of his most recent work. Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So you have the brochure, okay?
Yes.
Well, for others that, I guess everyone has them, but you can see the location, the project area.
If you get a little closer to the microphone.
So the project area, you can see here on the board where the proposal is, if I may. The buildings would be structured somewhere around here. 109 is in this area, and the buildings would be in this little part of the development. And we're not proposing to have anything done in the rest of the property, which, again, the abutter here is sewage treatment plant, town property, power line, and you have the propane company and the plastics company.
Could I make a request that you move to this side of it so that, and point to them, because there are people in the audience who really can't see what you're doing?
Thank you for that. So the location of the buildings would be oriented in this vicinity, entering from 109 here and driving. If you have that little pamphlet, there may be some indication of that. This is the general area where the buildings would be. And my point was sewage treatment plant, town property, power line, 109, Eastern Propane, and the factory. So this area is surrounded, for the most part, by a lot of vacant land. And to your point, Roger, 109, the amount of trees and landscaping is quite high. I actually took a picture, if anybody wanted to even go on Google Earth and do a street view to see the height of the trees. If our building is 400 to 500 feet away from the road, it would be virtually impossible to see.
And where are your effluent fields perhaps going to be?
That is, Chris could present to that.
Can you point to them where they might be on this drawing?
I can. I want to point to them or just point them out on the color renderings that I provided first. So if you go to the second sheet in the set, you'll see I ran this red dashed line out in the easterly direction. There's 2 fields that we would propose there, and then the 2 other fields would be arranged sort of behind eastern, and I'll point those out on the large plan that Anthony's got up. So the 2 EDAs.
Again, move to the other side so
Yes, sir.
the audience can see.
I apologize. So 2 EDAs would be placed here, effluent disposal areas, EDA.
Yeah.
And then we would propose 2 additional here, and if not in this location, they would be proposed in this location here.
Down there too, okay.
We have considered, if those areas are insufficient for whatever reason, we had previously placed EDAs for the prior design project out on this parcel. We are trying to avoid using those areas if possible.
So we took a drone shot of the general area, and the building in the middle there, that's Eastern Propane. Cemetery, oh, no, I got it. Cemetery, Route 109, Eastern Propane, and the property development is in this area. The masking here is pretty tremendous. And again, with the sewage treatment plant in this area, there's really no disturbance of view from really anywhere based on a photo like this. And Roger, to your point also, we took a photo that even something that's really close with the vegetation, it's very subtle. It would blend as nicely as you can into the environment. The structure behind it, I'm not suggesting that would be what we would build here, but it is typical of a multifamily, 3, 4, or 5 stories. Here's another one. Where's the other one? Are we missing one?
Is what's in this book representative of what you might be building?
Don't have it. Pardon?
Is this representative of?
That could be similar. That's a very, again, a typical type of something that's country, rural, that would may harmonize. I thought I had a bigger one of that. It's not there, is it? But, so what you're showing there is one in North Reading, Mass. That is called Berry Farms. It's another 180-unit complex, 4 buildings. Some of the buildings are 3 stories, some of them are 4. And it's another beautiful property that's set off the road with vegetation and trees, and it just seems to blend nicely into the environment.
Would you be seeking a variance for density if you could not connect to sewer in the high-intensity soil survey?
Most likely, every project that we've ever done that is of this nature, most communities don't have anything in the zoning bylaws that address multifamilies for the most part. So the process has typically been, we go to the town, we ask for a list of variance relief. There's a lot of zoning relief, if you will, and there could be 50, 100 things that are on there that we need relief for, and they go right down the line to what you said, height, density, it's parking, sewer, whatever it may be. The list is, depending on the town, is something that is worked out between us and the community to determine what would be the best approach to putting in a project that would, we feel that it enhances the community, and we find that the people that actually live there are quite satisfied with the living, the way that they're living. Actually, my mother-in-law lives in one of the properties that we just completed, and easy living. She's a widow, elevator, clean, activities, amenities, easy commute, and we find that many people benefit from that lifestyle.
So you're thinking that there's a separate building for gyms or perhaps?
Yeah, typically
that
that's the
kind of thing?
clubhouse. So the clubhouse would typically sprawl, depending on the unit count, it could be 3, 4, or 5,000 square feet or something. And in that would have, again, gathering spaces. It may have a mini version. I'm not going to call it a function hall because it's really not, but it would have TVs, fireplaces, gathering spaces, something that you'd see in a really nice lobby of a resort. And it would have little community spaces or business center where you could go and you have a fax machine, or you have a computer station or a conference room, something that would allow people that if they want to meet with a client or just do work, they can do that as well. So yes. And in some cases, some facilities have swimming pools, others may have tennis court, depending on what the demand is of that community.
I need to put my 2 cents worth in, and also because Vaughn's not here, that the picture that Roger showed of this one, the multicolors and all broken up so it looks kind of like New England, is kind of what we've always been leaning towards, rather than a more sleek city structure.
Well, we've done both. I just completed one that is very contemporary, and we completed others that's very, very traditional.
Yes,
So
this is what we stand. This is more like what everybody wants.
And that's the point, depending on the community. So what we would do is we would want to engage with the community and design something that is actually more suitable that for the surroundings. We're not going to come here and impose and say this is what it's going to be. It's going to be something that's, again, has to harmonize with the theme of the neighborhood and the community. So by no
Needs to
means are we
fit
going
in.
to come in here and have laser light shows. That's not, wouldn't be appropriate, and it wouldn't work. Maybe in Miami, not here.
Any more questions from the board?
Okay, no intrusions into the wetlands.
We try not to, no, but that would, again, is an engineering issue that Chris would address. If you would.
We have one crossing to get into the property, and that's it. And that crossing would likely be a stream crossing. We'd have to do that as an open bottom structure and make sure it spans properly, but not proposing any additional buffer or wetland impact.
Okay, and what about drainage? You've seen our new drainage?
I have. I'm very familiar with your new drainage rules because they are identical to the alteration of terrain standards. And we are very proficient in the alteration of terrain standards. We would capture, obviously, and treat the stormwater for phosphorus, nitrogen, all of the other items that come from stormwater, either through bioretention or through gravel wetlands. It would be detained, re-infiltrated where the soils are appropriate for that, and then sent back to the natural flow patterns. I can't, other than that is the design philosophy, we haven't worked out where all of that will take place just yet.
Okay, thank you.
One other question. Would you put any conservation restrictions on the land outside of this red dotted area?
It's something that we can certainly discuss and consider, but I don't know that we're here to make that final decision tonight.
And I guess my last question maybe is, do you have anything else behind there you want to show us?
Well, I think young Anthony went to try and find a larger poster board of the building that we keep talking about, but I'm not sure that Anthony has anything other magical there behind the posters.
If you could use the microphone.
Can't hear you.
Yeah, you're being televised, so we need you to use the...
Sorry, viewers at home. There may have been a slide that I had, but it's in your brochure. I just wanted to show the photo of the kitchen and some of the amenity spaces that show the detail of the type of work and the living environment that people would have. Again, they're nice, they're clean, new. They're not contemporary, so to speak, but they're modern. And it's nice when you have all the new amenities that you'd want in a home. This was just an example of a project that we just completed that 1, 2, and 3 bedrooms, how they would lay out. It's just a sample of something if somebody wanted to take a look at it, that the space is very spacious and laid out as comfortably as one could want. But again, the idea is to provide new, clean space, easy living as much as one can. And I use the word affordable because the difference from having quality living like this as opposed to having a single-family home or whatnot, the price difference is tremendous. And we're finding that these are renting out rather quickly wherever they're built. The occupancy rate is, I should say the vacancy rate is extremely low, and in most cases, there's a waiting list to get in. So,
one thing I would suggest is that if there were this number of single-family homes, there would be a much larger surface area for those structures.
Correct.
And therefore, their energy requirements to heat them would be huge. And so building in this kind of structure is very, very energy efficient per unit.
so the carbon footprint, to your point, is much lower to accommodate 180 units or 200 or 10 for that matter if it's built in a cluster formation like this. So thank you, Peter. That's a very valid point.
I guess if I had one parting comment, I would say the lower the better in terms of height.
The height. I understand, but sometimes lower means sprawling. So the more we sprawl, something gives, and then you end up taking environment and territory as opposed to consolidating and maybe going up one floor is I think the offset, instead of, it's not an ugly structure, you're not even looking at it, but I think the impact on the environment when you don't sprawl as much, I think there are more benefits if you do go up another level as opposed to sprawling. In the back of the pamphlet, there's something that was done by the New Hampshire Housing Assessment Committee, and it shows that there's a significant demand and need for housing, and they're saying that I believe it's 372 units a year are needed for the next 20 years to meet the need of the population growth in the lake region. So that is something that was provided or done by the board, not whatever board it was, the Housing Assessment Committee that determined that there's a major need for housing. We're trying to help solve that, but we don't want to just manufacture things. We want to build things of quality and that harmonize and are useful to the community. So we don't have any desire to come in and put in something that would be an eyesore, to your point, and not blend and harmonize. So if it's something that the board would consider, we would like to proceed with a plan on and lay it out of what needs to be done to go forward to see if this is a project that is even viable.
Yeah.
I guess I would suggest that when you
phased development?
Sorry, ladies first, I apologize.
Is this going to be a phased development, or are you going to build all of the buildings?
We would do it all at once because the construction schedule, when you break ground, we would be done within, we said, depending on weather and whatnot, it could be between 32, 38 months. So 3 years or so, start to finish. If you phase it, things just drag out a lot longer, and it's not really the environment people want to live in, get it done. If it were single-family homes, again, it would take 10 years. I'm sorry, Peter, go ahead.
It seems as if there's a perhaps issue between 3 and 4 story.
I don't know if it's...
So all I'm saying is that when you make your presentation in the future and are trying to get approval, it may be useful for you to show both versions and perhaps why the one that you think, which is a 4-story, is better than the 3.
I appreciate that. We will do that.
Do you have any questions for us?
I would very simply say, is this something that the community is open to? Do you feel that you have, to use your terminology, an appetite for a project of this nature?
I think our job really, when you come in, an applicant comes in before us, is to, if it meets the requirements, then we approve it. If it does not, then we work with the applicant to try and make it so that it does conform. Now, obviously, you're going to need some variances. You'll need to get them and then come back to us, assuming you're successful.
And again, the beauty is it's not downtown, it's not in your face, it's far enough away and secluded, if you will, and masked where it would kind of just fade into the countryside and allow the people that type of housing and living environment that they're looking for.
Yeah, I don't think I've heard any strong opposition from anybody on the board this evening, other than to potentially the height.
And I have a concern about the sewage disposal.
Again, everything that can be mitigated and addressed, that's the engineering phase that typically comes with these projects, because I have a lot of questions myself on that, so I have to put the team on it. But I'm not going to proceed with any further research or anything if I know that the town is in opposition of it, that you don't have any interest in it, then I don't have any desire to fight for that in that regard. I would rather just work and harmonize as much as we can. But to do the next phase of research and engineering does get quite costly. So before we engage, we just want to know that we have a partner to work with, and we want to treat it like a partnership, because we will be part of the community. This is property that we will own for a long time, and we're responsible to maintain everything. Along with these projects, there's always going to be a maintenance schedule that's going to give and provided to the town, so you know how we handle all the yearly testing with the fire suppression, with the trash removal, and with the sewerage and whatnot. All that is all managed and maintained internally. So again, it's nothing that the town would ever have to worry about. This is something that we take care of and we own. We just provide you with our yearly schedule.
Well, coincidentally,
Excuse me, personally, I don't have a problem with the height, given the site conditions and where it's located. But is a 4-story versus 3, is that a deal breaker for you?
Not necessarily, but I think it actually may benefit the site, because that extra open space where that building would go could be left for open space, or maybe the clubhouse goes there. I think it just makes the environment in the community that much more attractive.
Well,
if you will.
would economics help? I mean,
Steve,
if
could
I
you
could
get
Randy's...
Steve, could you get a little closer to your microphone?
Okay. If I could get Randy's wife's rate instead of Randy's rate, I think that might help my attitude. You know?
Yeah, there's like when you're building a structure, I think it allows us to go a little quicker. So doing 3 structures, you go vertical more quickly, as opposed to doing 3 then a 4th. So timeline, it saves a little bit on time. We roll out a little bit more quickly. I would think that there is a benefit to go 3 structures, 4 stories, if you can.
More energy efficient. That's true.
Without a doubt, the energy efficient part, the environmental part is a major benefit of going 3 structures. The footprint is smaller, and again, energy efficiency is key. This is what everybody's dealing with. The energy code now is so strict and so difficult to manage that these buildings they're very tight, they're very well insulated. The systems that we're putting in now, everything is changing constantly. But that's all the engineering part that we will engage with down the line if we can. I'd like to use the expression, if we don't strike out and get on first base, then all the next phase of research comes in, and we will address all those issues as you brought up.
All right, so coincidentally, we have our multifamily housing forum immediately following your presentation here this evening, so you might want to listen in.
I'd be happy to, and if there's any questions that I can add value to, I would be happy
Yeah,
to.
I still have some concerns that you're not providing more affordable housing and workforce housing, especially since we have an ordinance that gives you more density. Just my thought.
And I actually, we discussed that, and we are not opposed to it, but in order to do that, we would have to go for additional density, which may, again, maybe it is 4 buildings, 4 stories to offset that. We're totally open to doing something like that, but before we went there, we're already right at the limit at 180 units because of land mass, and I don't know if you want to call it by right or whatnot, but if you use the matrix of 180 units for 90 acres, then that's where we would cap it. But if the town is open to that and it allows us to have additional density, then to your point, we could petition the board to consider 240 units with the additional building would be affordable. because that's how the math would work. If you go for that, the percentage that's allowed by your bylaws, I believe it's up to 30%. So that would take it from 180 to 240. That's another 60 units that would be allowed for affordable. So there goes your, the idea of trying to keep it a little bit small. We would have to do 4 buildings at 4 stories.
Judging by the expression on your attorney's face, you may want to consult with him about that.
No, I was going to thank Kathy for increasing the volume to 240.
Yeah. There was some mention about maybe having commercial usage on this site, which would have to be looked at how that would be handled, how it would be addressed.
There's no plans to have any commercial on site.
Well, your client seemed to indicate there might be.
How?
I don't think so.
Well, he was talking about office meetings and...
I think the inference was the work from home aspect where people could come and have small meetings, but there's no intent to have an actual dedicated commercial use.
100% residential. And just to get back to your point, Kathy, on cost, one of the problems that I see that we have in Wolfeboro is all our long-term rentals been converted to short-term. And as a result, there's no supply, and when there's no supply, the prices go up. You allow this project to come in, prices will go down, or in other projects like it. And it's just supply and demand, and I think that's sort of one of the problems that we have, is that market has gone away, and we need to increase the supply to bring the cost down, which is just, natural economics. So I had just a couple of final clarification points, and that is assume that we get a height variance, whether it's 3 or 4 stories, we're going to need a variance, and if we don't get that, the project dead. And I didn't hear any pushback on having more than 5 units in a building, but that will also necessitate a variance, and if we don't get that, then again, the project is dead. But assuming that we can get the density of the 180, are there any other significant problems? I heard you, Roger, addressing the sewage, so that definitely needs to be, that's a threshold issue for everybody, so we know we've got to deal with that. Was there any other sort of make or break issues? I heard from the chairman there wasn't a lot of, strong objection, and we've had a couple of quiet people here, so I'm trying to read the audience and still don't have a good handle on whether this is something that they should go forward on or bail out on.
Well, from my perspective, if you get your variances and you meet the requirements, that's
Then we
what
can
is
talk about
required.
paint color.
Can
We
I,
like color.
Yeah,
can I
and
just say, can, oh,
yeah,
go ahead.
no, go ahead, Jane.
I think it's a little premature for us and maybe even a little unfair to ask us, how this is going to go over. We're representing the public, but we are not the public. And I think last week you may have seen that, when the public is upset about something or whatever, they will come out and they will speak up. So for you to ask us is one thing, but I don't think that we should be predicting what our fellow community members think.
Fully
So-
understand, and we are hopeful that the public will come out and support this project, actually. Last time we had sort of a warm reception, I thought, on it, and had very little pushback, particularly given the neighborhood. But I guess that's where we'll leave it with the board then. Unless you have any last questions for any of us?
There may be some members of the audience who will have comment at the end of this who you might learn from.
We would welcome that. Might as well find out now what they might be,
Yeah,
Okay, well,
if the board permits that.
well, we do need housing.
All right, thank you. The next item on the agenda for discussion is the multifamily housing discussion that was in the public notice. The planning board is holding this forum to get ideas from you, the public, on how to address multifamily housing in Wolfeboro. Multifamily discussion is meant to be a separate topic from short-term rental discussion. For the purposes of Wolfeboro's zoning ordinance, multifamily means 3 or more dwelling units per building. And we see multifamily housing as a tool to provide more housing opportunity where there are few suitable sites in town, and along with a perceived community desire to maintain open space. So here are a few examples of what we're looking for as part of this forum. Where is multifamily permitted? Do our regulations ensure neighborhood compatibility? Should tax incentives be offered to encourage development of nonprofit multifamily housing? Are Wolfeboro zoning ordinances unreasonably prohibitive to multifamily development? Should Wolfeboro's zoning ordinance be revised to encourage multifamily housing? If so, how? And if not, why not? And we welcome your thoughts, and we'll open to public comment here, if anybody would like to speak.
Oh, and there's a copy of the multifamily ordinance right here.
Of the ones I just said, no, I just have the one that I read out, but you're welcome to it.
Yeah, there are several copies there. Okay, thanks.
Audrey, would you like my copy? Does anybody care to speak?
My name's Kathy Dragonfly, and it wasn't to one of your questions you just asked, but I'm just wondering what the status of the shelter is and if there's anything we can do with that building to get it open for some of our summer help that we're always so desperately looking for housing. It seems like if they've closed the shelter and that's sitting empty, but it's all queued up, it would be a good opportunity. So,
Thank you.
Start a rumor. Start a rumor.
Want to go first? Hi, my name's Brody DeShays. I live at Elm Street. I serve on the school board, but what I state here is not representative of the board or the district. My first question is, I have some questions before. I feel as if some of the things you listed off, Doug, were premature to some of the things that the town needs to do before it can consider some of the changes, but I'll get into that in a minute.
Get closer to the microphone.
Yeah, excuse me. There we go. When the town, our impact fees, their flat rate, those impact fees, how much of that goes towards the town's budget or infrastructure in the town, and how much of it goes towards the school district by about a percentage?
100% goes to the school.
Okay. And that's something I actually learned pretty recently. So that's an important thing to think about. So all these units that they pay impact fees to the town for, all it does is it buy downs the town's portion of paying for the Governor Wentworth Regional School District's budget. So just the town of Wolfeboro's portion, it's about a third of the school district's budget is paid by Wolfeboro. So it buys it down, not even enough for people to really notice in their tax bills. So that's the first thing. We're talking about, well, then the next thing is, we're talking about being able to loosen up our density in a lot of our single-family zoned unit areas and to increase the housing stock, or even to have the sewer or water system to support a housing project, even like one today. We have to really consider how are we going to address the estimate about $10 million of cost to our sewer and water system that needs to be done over the next decade or two. And especially with a town that's been less willing to spend money, at least the taxpayers, and we're now operating in a default budget, right? So unless this is done in harness with the Board of Selectmen, where in a 10-year plan, you see what infrastructure is going to be improved, expanded, to be able to have the capacity to be able to have even entertain these ideas, I don't see how it's possible. You have an impact fee that currently goes to offset, obviously, people's school portion of their property taxes, but the majority of people moving into units in Wolfeboro are retired. So one time when they brought that, you were on the probably planning board way back then, Roger. What was it, 96 they brought the impact fee forward for the town?
No, that was after me. I was on in the 70s.
Okay, all right. I didn't mean to date you there, but at any rate, So the town created an impact fee because a lot of the folks that are moving to town were like my parents, right? And everyone said they're going to bring 2 to 3 kids with them. So let's offset some of our school costs, right? Well, now it's kind of a different issue, right? The people moving, average household in New Hampshire has about 1.1 kids. Wolfeboro, the average family probably moving in, likely is retired, right? Average age in the town is over 55, right? So the planning board really needs to be working with the Board of Selectmen and thinking of better ways to raise funds from these projects to be able to offset infrastructure costs, because ultimately, the second you put any new unit onto sewer or water, those enterprise funds that fund our sewer and water system, they need to be backfilled by the property taxpayers. They're subsidized. Our sewer system wouldn't exist if it wasn't for the overwhelming subsidy that the property taxpayers allow, and same with the water system. So, I mean, you listed off some great ideas, Doug, and some great questions to consider, but in my mind, and I asked at a previous housing forum, is like, it's almost a non-starter without the resources. It's like, you know, it's like asking a kid to learn, but you haven't given them food for a day. How do you expect a kid to be ready in the classroom if they haven't been fed? So it's like, how do you expect a town to address housing needs that doesn't have the resources or the ability to raise the revenues to do it? And when the property taxpayers, they feel like they're getting, you know, like stones being bled, right? There's nothing left. So that's all I have to say. I think the planning board just needs to do more planning, and more than just, you know, the different zoning amendments, but how is this part of a larger view? So I think the planning board needs to look 3,000 foot at, like, how are we broadly going to do this and do it in coordination with other boards in the town, and then look at the 30-foot view of, like, okay, what would be some interesting ways to change our zoning amendments and our planning amendments and present those to the taxpayers and tell them, yes, we have the resources that if we do this, it's not going to whack you in your property tax bill. So
Thank you, Brody. And Brody, just to build on what you just said, at our last meeting, the planning board nominated the people who would serve on the capital improvement plan. And so that's probably something that needs to be considered, to the sewer and water as part of the capital improvements.
Oh yeah, definitely. And you know, but then again, like every single time we put money into the not the enterprise fund, into some of the infrastructure funds for the water that are supposed to be saved aside for that future $10 million expenses, it tends to just get rated for smaller things that come up along the way. So
Yes.
it's like, you know, it means if we want to do those things, we have to save that money to offset a bonded project, because the taxpayers aren't going to approve a $10 million bond. So
Yeah.
I appreciate that, you know, that we have a CIP and has bylaws and they're planning, but, you know, that process needs to be a little bit more teethed out before we get to the, okay, and this is how we're going to loosen density to increase housing.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
I'm wondering, when they put that, the impact fee or whatever it is he's talking about, was that in part because of the Claremont decision that some towns had to pay other towns? Does anybody know that?
I certainly don't know the answer to that.
Okay, because I think we are a receiver town, and we are not a donor town because of our overall general. When did that change?
Brody, if you could take the mic.
So the Claremont decision has to do with funds raised for education from the state. Impact fees are per unit of housing units. They pay a fee, and that's supposed to offset the increased cost of education to supply for the local portion. Now, your question, what was the other part of that question? The
Did it start?
Donor?
When did it start?
Oh, when did it? From what I've heard, Ms. Seibel, who serves on the school board too, when she was on the planning board, said they adopted sometime between 95 and 97. And the reason for it really was just to offset possible costs for the local property tax rate for education funding. Now, New Hampshire doesn't have donor towns since 2011. The state changed the way that education is funded, all statewide property tax. So you'll see in your tax bill, you got your local tax rate, your municipal, you got your county tax rate, then you got your local education, then you got your state education. And that state education is retained in our by our town and actually offsets and decreases our local education rate. So it goes towards Wolfeboro's apportionment, and there's a local evaluation formula, or not evaluation, apportionment formula that determines how much each town in Governor Wentworth pays. So it's complicated, but none of that money from the statewide property tax actually goes to the state, to the education trust fund. Town collects it, sends it to the school district, and the impact fees also go towards the local education funding and decreases your local property tax rate for education. So I hope everyone listening understood
Yeah,
that. But it
I
was
think
probably
that
tough to
we
follow.
adopted the income tax fee in 2009.
Was it 2000? I heard it was a lot earlier.
And then we added the fees several years, or a couple of years later. Is that?
That was,
It was 2007. Okay, so
Yeah.
it was much later than I was told.
Yeah, right.
About a decade, but
so
the
that's-
system works the same way either way. So
Yeah.
no, it doesn't have to do with the Claremont decision or state funding of education.
Right.
so that's useful information, but it's not really part of the multifamily that we're trying to do.
I have two other things to say. I'm wondering, with this project, I know I'm backstepping, but is this condos or is this apartments? Or
They made it very clear that it's apartments.
Apartments.
Okay.
Rental apartments.
Okay, I came here thinking they were condos, but
No.
then I kept hearing. And the other thing is, I want to call BS on the money, because if we can afford $13 million for an addition to the police station, we can take care of our children and their water and sewer.
Thank you. Would anybody else like to speak?
Hi, good evening, Audrey Klein. I really just wanted to touch on some broader kind of ways of thinking, and one of mine is that I'd like the planning board to concentrate on affordable housing or lower market rate housing, and there's really limited ways that you can do that. But one of them is the inclusionary housing ordinance, and perhaps addressing some things in that ordinance that would go more towards the workforce housing cost range. Also looking at developing a plan where industry and commercial properties coming into town have the biggest bonus for residential development, because they can control both the cost of their units and who lives there, unlike any other legislation can do. They have the ability to do that. So a private developer not taking state or federal money has a much more ability to focus their residents on the people that need to live in the area. That's another reason why some of the workforce housing developments have a difficult time, because they're taking money from the feds, and that requires a different building practices that are expensive. And so the inclusionary zoning, if they're doing it on their own without taking money, they have the ability to make smaller units, for instance, and use other building practices that save money. So that's just a general idea. I'd like the planning board to focus on that segment of the housing market. How many times do we have to say that regulating short-term rentals is the quickest way to increase some of our housing stock? I think that's true. It would be nice if the planning board had some guardrails that they all agreed on, and then they could tell us what that is. I mean, do you all agree that that statement is true or not? We have no idea. What else do I want to say? Oh, I want to say, think about legislation that develops neighborhoods, not just housing. I think it's important that the housing developments have the services to go with them. They need to do laundry, they need haircuts, they need childcare, they need all the things that everybody else needs that come into town to use our pretty limited resources as far as that goes. And so neighborhoods, not just clusters of houses. Again, looking at the lower end of the rental or ownership scale, manufactured housing, tiny homes. I don't think trickle-up housing works. The housing advocates have said, let's increase density and build those $700,000 houses because the $500,000 people will move into those, and the $300,000 people want the $500,000 house, and that opens the market. I don't think so. I don't believe that that works. I think that's a pie in the sky. Those are just some bigger thoughts. I wish I had your list. I can
Audrey,
maybe go through it.
I'll be happy to send it to you.
Okay, thank you.
Well, just a second. Can you comment a little on the existing multifamily ordinance and your concerns about it?
I'm having difficulty with that because I don't want to have too strong of an opinion on something as I sit on another board, but I guess I've already maybe expressed my opinion about that. So, and I actually have written out here in each of the zones what it says about multifamily housing. And Doug, you mentioned when we were talking about short-term rental, you said, well, we understand as a board if it's not spoken to in zoning, then it's not permitted. But once we define it, you know, we've spoken to it, and then it's either permitted or not permitted, depending. Well, the same is for the multifamily section. You go to the sections of the zoning first to see what it says you need to do, and then you're restricted by how you do it in the multifamily section, is the way I read it. So going down through the districts, if it's not mentioned, then it's not permitted. And as you read the zoning ordinance, there's three, let's say, truisms that the courts look at when they're judging whether something makes sense. One is you read the whole zoning ordinance as one piece. You don't just pull out one piece and says, that's what it says, that's what it means. You read the whole zoning ordinance and you attach the pieces to it that speak to the same thing in another section. And then you I don't want to say assume, because you don't assume, but the whole zoning ordinance needs to make sense as one piece. So if it says in one section, for instance, the inclusionary zoning section says multifamily is allowed in the village residential, the residential, and the general residential. Well, why would it say that if multifamily was already allowed in those districts? That doesn't make sense. And the court says, if it doesn't make sense, that's probably not what was meant. So that's one kind of truism.
Okay.
And there are two others which I don't have with me, but I have spoken to those before. So in my opinion, if you look at the court decisions, you look at the three ways that they look at the zoning, and you run that through this situation, you'll find that the multifamily section is supposed to be read as go to the individual zones, determine what it says. Village residential is by special exception, and then you go to the multifamily section and you say, and the requirement for that is you can only have whatever it says in there. And so that's the way to go about reading it. So if it doesn't mention it, it's not permitted. It would need a variance.
Okay,
And
so
in these
would you
other
be more
sections-
comfortable if it was in each zone then? Like in the VR or R zone, that it was stated? Is that what you're saying?
That would be, it would have to be made clear that the planning board is suggesting that multifamily is permitted in the zone under whatever conditions you're putting in that zone, rather than It's allowed there anyway, we're just moving the wording around, which I think is the problem with what I had last year. Certainly, if the planning board thinks that it should be permitted in a zone, then it would go in the zone. It would go under, for instance, village residential by special exception. Commercial C1 is permitted. It just says so, permitted. Pretty simple. Let's see, Center Street mixed-use business district. It's permitted for elderly housing. So if you put it into the zoning sections, you can segment out what you want in each zone. And that's the way this is written, because that's the way they intended it to be read,
Okay,
in my opinion.
Yeah.
Thank you, Audrey. Any questions for Audrey?
Did you have some other issues you wanted to bring up?
I'm really more interested in, I really like to hear what the planning board discussion is, and I'd like the planning board to kind of lay out some parameters that they think are important and then narrow it down with language. It seems like we have these big general discussions and then bang, there's wording language in the warrant article. We don't have this discussion in between. And there's no back and forth about why you're saying things or how we can respond to what you're thinking, because we don't have that 2 or 3 meetings that allows for that kind of conversation.
Well, we have had, for each of the warrant articles that were put forward in past years, there have been public hearings where there was opportunity to ask the board what the intent was.
Right, and in my opinion, we've done all the talking and we haven't heard any discussion from the board. I mean, you take the information in and it feels like it goes into a black hole because we don't hear very much discussion about how you feel about those things that you're bringing up, how each of you feel.
Okay,
what are your
so an
differences?
earlier discussion then on what are other item, multifamily or whatever, we should have a couple before the...
I think, yeah, I
yeah,
would like to
okay.
hear what you guys think about what we've said and why.
Well, so one of the reasons for having this forum here tonight
Wonderful.
is
Yeah,
to hear that.
Early and often.
I'm a little discouraged at the poor attendance, but I guess we need to get the word out better.
Well, that could be, but you have an opportunity here to discuss what you've already heard and let us hear it, which I think is what we would like.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
Ann Blodgett. To segue off from what Audrey was saying, on 10/17/2023, you had a housing forum. I think many of us, it was a pretty good turnout, stood up and asked questions. We were told that there would be no answers, but you took the questions down. I have a long list of questions unanswered. So if people don't show up at a forum, it's because they're not getting answers. They're not getting, we're coming in hopeful that you're going to explain where you're going so we can react. We're not the experts, you're the planning board. And I think a lot of these questions are based on, where's the data? Now, Mr. Goodwin tonight said that obviously the developer had more information than we did. That seemed wrong to me. Why don't we know our own town? I think I've stood up many times saying it's all about the data. Randy gives, Attorney Walker gives his anecdotal, there's only so many houses for rent or there's whatever. Is this going to fill our gaps? I don't know. If they start at $2,500 a month, we're probably going to be housing people who work in other areas. That would just be a guess. I didn't hear the question tonight. I'm wondering why you didn't ask, what the rents would be. Randy's $1,800 a month. What was that? 2-bedroom? 2.5 bedroom. I bet these will not be 1,800 for 2.5 bedrooms. So anyway, I mean, I'm just thinking we have a disconnect, and the disconnect in not hearing answers makes it really hard for us to want to come here and be helpful and give you good feedback. Thank you.
Thank you.
Could I just suggest that this particular project, which was presented tonight, and actually was a number of months ago, is of a completely different scale than most of the things that have been brought to the planning board. And so it may end up being that your statement that we weren't listening, and he has, if this person wants to, or this group wants to make this investment in this particular project, they know more about the economics than we do.
Their economics, not our economics.
That's correct.
That's a big difference.
That's what they're looking at.
Their economics, can they make money?
That's right. But it is not something that is our business to look at the economics of 100 and so many unit development before they get to us.
No, but we should know if it meets our needs, I think.
My name is Marge Hart, and I just have to say I agree with a lot of what was said tonight. So they speak a little more eloquently and have more knowledge about town and planning and everything. But my point in agreeing with them is just understanding and planning out. If you're looking at adding 200 units, 180, 240, if you've got 4 people per, you know, how many more potential people is that from an impact for the town? What are the roads? Are the roads ready to handle all of that? I live on Libby Street. There's a lot of traffic that will come up through that. Can we handle that? Do we know that as a town or itself? Do we know what the income tax, property tax, influx would be from these kinds of projects, and how would that budget out for us to pay for some of this infrastructure that Brody talked about? Jane, I agree with your assessment that, this is, having the public be able to come to speak and hear and give input as opposed to the planning board making a decision about things. As far as running a forum, my just input for the future would be to, with the agenda, add those questions. So that's made available to people to have access to those questions, because there was a lot of them that came out pretty quickly. But if people have those questions ahead of time, then they can, react to those in this kind of a forum. And then just, again, I think, what Audrey said, what is the research and the research for what is the workforce needs? What's the housing needs for the businesses to run the organizations that they're running? What do they need for, waitering and, just providing services, because we have a lot of people that come into the town. So that, from a data and a planning perspective, I think is very important to help get that input, as Ann just said, and be able to react to projects like this, knowing what our needs are and what our capacity is and what our growth plans are, I think is extremely important for the town of Wolfeboro. Thank you.
Thank you.
I just forgot I wanted to, Audrey Klein, speak to something Brody said as far as retirees living here. I don't think it matters how old you are. It matters what you can afford to live in. So I think I'm retiring this year, yay, and I'm going to be working part-time, probably the rest of my life. So, the 65-year-old grocery clerk is the new teenager. Retired people work. Older people work. They volunteer. They have time. But they're not living in a $2,500 per month, apartment. So it's the cost of living that's important, and what we're targeting for the housing needs that's important.
Thank you, Audrey.
Suzanne Ryan, I wasn't going to say anything. I think everything's been stated very nicely. And I don't know as though you can make this a condition of approval if you get to that stage. But the town is struggling with services, specifically ambulance. So maybe these developers would fund an ambulance for us. And maybe the impact fees could be directed to that. I don't know. We're still collecting impact fees, right?
Yes.
And what would that impact fee be on 180 units, approximately?
$2,024 per unit.
How much?
$2,024 per unit.
Not worth the effort. So I'll say I would hope the impact fees don't make a dent towards an ambulance. So maybe the ambulance is reason to negotiate.
Would be for 180 units in their project, not one unit. The figure.
$2,024 times 180.
Thank you.
That's a lot. That's a lot.
Only one time.
Brody, again, that's, my calculator works, right, 180 units, right? That's $364,320. So, but the thing is to Suzanne, to your point about the impact fees and what they go towards, they currently go towards Wolfeboro's portion of school funding, local rates, so our local portion of school funding. So, I mean, I think personally, I think the town should be looking at how much it raises impact fees, because the state allows you to raise more in impact fees per unit than the town currently does. And the town should consider having, I would almost say nearly all of it, go towards infrastructure. That's just my personal opinion. And I hear Audrey's point about, yeah, it might be primarily retirees who move, and yes, they do have they do meet the economic needs, but the impact fee was originally adopted to offset school costs with the idea that, you'd have a family of 4 move here. Well, if that's not the type of family moving here, and that's not the types of folks who are creating the additional burden by moving here into new units, new housing developments, then the point of the impact fee is to defray the costs of the property taxpayers and to have the people moving here pay for that, because there are previous bonded projects that were created so that housing could exist. And they weren't here to pay for maybe 5 to 10 years of it, so they're back paying. They're like, oh, I'm going to pay, $4,000 for my unit of housing that can exist now because the taxpayers have subsidized infrastructure for a certain number of years, or a bonded project of infrastructure. So I really think when it comes to the funds raised for this infrastructure, the state permits the town to have an impact fee, and it's the planning board, if I'm not mistaken, that puts forward the warrant article for the impact fee and what that money goes towards and how it's calculated. So it might be incumbent on this planning board to help our Board of Selectmen and our budget committee for the infrastructure that they manage to help them get the funds. So then projects like this can then say, yes, the impact fees that you're going to charge us will go towards that infrastructure that you had to create so our project could exist.
Yeah,
to me, that seems more logical.
So about
that is on our work program this year, because I do think we should be looking at that.
About 3 years ago, the planning board was looking at expanding the scope of impact fees, and there was some general pushback from the selectmen. It didn't ultimately go to them, but the question was, should impact fees be used for more than just offsetting the school tax? For example, water, sewer, stormwater, roads, and that largely didn't go anywhere. It was met with, well, we have connection fees for water, and we have connection fees for sewer.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment. Go ahead. I just want to comment that we do have user fees for water and sewer if they do tie into the sewer system. These guys are talking about their own septic there, but it's $2,000. Well, $6,000 per single-family home, then another $2,000 for each bedroom above 3 bedrooms for the water, and then it'd be the same for the sewer if they tie in town sewer. So there is a method in there to get money, and those go directly to that utility for the maintenance of either the water system, if it's a water impact fee that's collected, or the sewer, if it's that fee collected, so.
So
there is
for
a mechanism
example,
in
if
place.
this 180 units at 360 bedrooms would pay $2,000 per bedroom, so that's $720,000.
And where does that money go?
It'll go
does it
right
into
to the water
ent-
system.
Goes to the water fund.
Water
But,
department.
yeah, does it go towards like a maintenance fund, or does it go towards the enterprise
It
fund?
goes, no, it's not an enterprise, it will go towards basically like a capital reserve for maintenance replacement, future projects for, water line replacement projects like we're getting ready to do here on South Main Street. We know we have other ones in town that need to be done, so goes toward that type of thing. If it's a sewer, it will go toward either the distribution system or the treatment portion of it. It could go in either part of that, to go into the treatment plant for upgrades, things like that, so.
No, I think that's good for taxpayers to know, Brad,
Right.
and I appreciate you sharing that. The only additional issue, though, is that obviously the cost to operate the entire system increases, so your enterprise fund's going to be more. And ultimately, we know, I'm on the town water and sewer. I benefit property taxpayers, the other taxpayers who are on town water and sewer. Our tax bills all subsidize the sewer and the water system. So the more hookups we have, obviously, there's the immediate defray in the cost, and maybe some projects that have been put off down the road can be done sooner, but it still doesn't address some of the long-term things. And it also doesn't address that. I think the town is still sacrificing revenues it could have to go towards those projects by changing what the impact fees go towards. That's just my personal opinion. I think it would make more sense because of the change in the demographics in the community and the change of the people moving into the community, that your impact fees are directed not towards necessarily the education, decreasing our local education tax rate, but rather decreasing our municipal tax rate by paying for projects. That's just my personal opinion. So, but that's for you guys to consider.
But Brady, if we are now working in this particular project here with average of 2 bedrooms, sort of indicates that there are going to be families moving in, and we're also looking at workforce housing and low-cost housing so that people can live here who are going to do the service jobs. Those people tend to be younger. They tend to not be able to afford houses, and so therefore here you end up having a bunch of units here. So it may end up being that those people are going to be putting more children into a school system, and therefore that is where the money should go.
I'd contend
And I'm going to
Yeah.
suggest that, much of the property in Wolfeboro has been built out. And so, yes, these retirees come here, but they either buy an old house which doesn't have that impact fee, or they end up having, there's not room to build a new house. So I think that it may end up being that the housing that we are looking at, similar to this project, ends up having an impact fee which benefits the school system.
Well, I brought this up at the last housing forum where I used Harriman Hill as an example and showed that the number of people who in Harriman Hill work full-time of about, I think it was 100 residents, was about 20. And so that's something to remember, and that almost half of them were collecting Social Security, so they were of retirement age. And based on real estate reports that the State Real Estate Association does, our market in the Lakes region is still primarily retirees moving in, even in places where they have housing projects similar to this one or Harriman Hills. And even statewide in areas that might be younger and older, average number of children in a household is about 1.1. So even if you say half of them are going to have kids in a housing, that's 90 kids. But we have the infrastructure already to deal with that. We have classrooms that, our classroom sizes are decreasing. There's currently school districts reaching out to us knowing that we have open seats in our schools that want to tuition kids in because they want their kids to have a better education than other school districts that they might already be tuitioning into.
But isn't there a demand for workforce housing in Wolfeboro?
I'm not denying there's a demand for housing.
So if that is a demand which we are trying to work with, doesn't that indicate that we're dealing with a group of people who are not going to be retired?
Well, as Audrey mentioned, there's a difference between, people who are retired and semi-employed, people who are older and underemployed, and then people who are older and, fully employed, right? And it just seems like our demographics in New Hampshire, Wolfeboro, I see no indication of a project making it so the average age of Wolfeboro will go down. I see as if, people view Wolfeboro as an older community. There's a lot of benefits here if you're an older person. There's a lot of places where once you age out and you need V&A care, at-home care, or you need to move into a nursing home, you have the county nursing home and like 3 other sites that you can easily move to. So I don't know, it's a tough question, but my point is when we talk about the infrastructure raise, I think it does make more sense that I think demographics-wise, the people moving in are still going to be older, and I think the impact fee should go towards general infrastructure so the taxpayers aren't subsidizing it. But that's just my opinion. I think the board has to strongly consider that because the town needs revenues to support projects like this if it's going to move forward, or else they're going to struggle to pass bonded warrant articles in the future to deal with these large infrastructure costs or to expand the infrastructure to support projects like this one or additional. But I really appreciate the dialogue. I mean, the back and forth has been excellent. I've learned a lot, so I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Brody.
I think we can see the demographics in this room. We got Brody, and then there's the rest of us. We're mostly, older. It would be helpful, I think, to simplify and clarify the zoning ordinance anytime that we can. I think that is unnecessarily complicated, and I want to go back to one point that Audrey made. She indicated that there are some zones, we'll just say the residential zone, that don't specifically say you can have multifamily housing. That conflicts, arguably, with the multifamily housing part. And I believe it trumps it, and that's my interpretation, and I think there's another interpretation you could have. Regardless of who's right, this board should clarify that, so we never have to ask that question again. So hopefully, next March, that will not be an issue that we even have to discuss. It should be simplified, cleared up, so that anytime you get these types of conflicts, make it easier for the applicants, make it easier for the board, make it easier for everybody, and it will keep the costs down. And we'd all prefer probably to spend money in other areas than on costs coming before, boards, which is getting increasingly expensive to do that. But anything you can do to clarify and simplify, I think that's always a good thing. On the multifamily side, I think we should have more higher buildings, bigger buildings, and permit more density, but in areas where it's appropriate. Downtown, no. In outlying areas, I think that would be appropriate throughout the town, and I think for all the reasons, the energy efficiency and environmental benefits, et cetera, I think that's something that we as a town should strive for. And if we get to a capacity, then we stop. I don't think that we're there yet. I don't think we're remotely close. And I think that one of the problems, and our office does more real estate than anybody in the area, and you can't buy a house in this town. The average person struggles to buy a house. I was executive in a state. We sold a manufactured housing unit in Birchill Estates, was $275,000. They probably paid $80,000 for it 15 years ago. It has just escalated up. So people like Brady, Brody, I'm sorry. Thought you were Tom Brady, so the GOAT. Yeah, there we go. It's tough to move in, and we do have an older population, and I think the more housing that we can have, the better. But prices are high, and my solution to it is to increase the volume.
Thank you, Randy.
Randy, I agree with you completely that the permitted uses sections of the ordinance and the multifamily ordinance need to agree on where multifamilies are permitted.
All I heard was you agreed with me. I'll take that.
I wasn't going to stop there, Randy.
Audrey Klein again. I hate arguing with lawyers, but Mr. Walker knows that it's the zoning board that decides what the zoning ordinance says, not the planning board. So yes, that should be clarified, but unfortunately, it should be clarified at the zoning board. And the only way to do that is for somebody to appeal a decision of the planning board. It's really very not good, but that's the way it is. I also wanted to say, and it's on my list, as far as developing, I agree, we have an infrastructure problem downtown with regard to multifamily housing or any housing. We allow ADUs, we allow duplexes everywhere. They're not getting built. That's not something we can impact very well. There's other forces around us that are, working on the housing issue or against the housing issue. But when this multifamily housing discussion came up, I called the fire department. And I said, well, how long does it take you to get out to Village Corner Road, which is at the end of Brown Road, out to Route 16, basically through Ossipee. And they said it's 24 minutes. It's 8 minutes to Robin Acres and 7 minutes to Orchards off Pleasant Valley Road. So that development out there on Browns Ridge Road is premature development. And it costs a lot of money for us to have that kind of a development in our equipment, in our personnel, and for public safety. And you know, while the fire department's out there answering a burnt toast call and somebody has a serious accident on the corner in South Wolfeboro, they're in the wrong place for the wrong reasons. So there's a lot of reasons not to develop pods of just housing off away from the center of town where they don't have services, and we also have to provide them with services. So I am not for housing developments outside of the residential areas, basically. I think that's, I guess one of the reasons I think people don't do ADUs or duplexes and then rent them is because, especially with experiences with COVID, the fear of getting stuck with a non-paying renter is really high, because a lot of people have these rental units because that is part of their income. And when they have an issue with a renter, it's just really scary to have that happen. Short-term rental, you don't have to worry about that. So I understand that there's reasons why people might choose one over the other. That's all.
Thank you, Audrey.
Thanks.
Would anybody else like to speak? Go ahead.
Yeah, and I'd like to thank everybody for listening to our presentation, and I completely sympathize with the town, and all the points that they brought up are extremely valid. Every community that we've dealt with seems to have some kind of a financial issue. The one thing that I've learned all the years of developing that we had is certain projects can really deplete the town of certain resources. When I've done single-family communities, the town has to assume the road. Town has to assume the water, the sewer, and fire has to manage that, fire hydrants, and on and on and on. So along with the children and the school systems. So single-family developments are really a drain financially on a town. When we do 55-plus communities or something like this, there's very little, almost zero drain on a town's resources. If anything, it's more of a financial plus because of the revenue that it does bring in. If you look at a 55-plus community, it's all managed by the community, not by the town. The children are not in the school system because they don't have any children of school age. So that actually, a lot of towns benefit. They're looking for those types of projects. In multifamilies like this, it's not really heavily populated by children, so it doesn't really tax the town's school system. Again, it's independent, so it's not that type of a drain on the town's resources. I understand about sewer. We're trying to evaluate whether we can manage the sewer system on site, if that's possible or not. All that engineering is going to be done. But again, the financial burdens that every town has and all the needs that you have, projects like this can help. Brings in tax revenues, building permit fees, and any other fees that go with that. But there's a bigger issue that's occurring. This is a nationwide problem that I attended an event in Miami recently with one of the top developers in the country, and said that housing starts are way down in the last 2 years. So what's happening is the inventory is way down and the need keeps going up. Housing starts are down because of the high rate of interest. A lot of projects are dead on arrival. They're not even starting. Many new projects, there are no new shovels going in the ground, like to your point about building duplexes or other projects. So this isn't an issue that you have just locally. This is happening nationwide. Some areas with the, for example, I just found out that in Texas, they have an abundance of supply, but just about everywhere else in the country, there isn't. There needs to be more housing like this. If we all agree, it sounds that we have a housing issue. If we can support each other and put something together that would allow this to happen, whether it's however internally the ZBA works with the planning board and whatever the districts are, allow something like this to happen, I think this would be the time to have it happen. And again, if not here, where? And if not now, when? Very simple question, because you have the need. This can help the town with resources. It can help with the, whether it's affordability. I consider it to be affordable housing because of the cost of what it takes to live in a duplex or a single family. If you have a 2-bedroom, 2 people could be splitting rent. It helps. There's your workforce. It's also retirees. It's young couples. Two working young couple can contribute to that as well. If this is something we can work together on collectively, I'd like to see that happen. If not, I respectfully understand if this isn't right for the community, we will withdraw. I want to work with you as much as we can, but if there's going to be tremendous opposition, then I don't know what to say. I just want to thank you for your time. But we have a need. Let's try to meet that need. If there are any other questions or concerns, I'd love to hear it. But again, I want to thank everybody for listening to our proposal.
Thank you. Any further public comment on the Housing Forum? All right. Thank you all who did attend for your comments. We appreciate it. And we'll try to come back with some answers rather than just taking the questions. The next item on the agenda is the short-term rental update on our process. I learned from our planner today that we have an opinion from our legal counsel to review. So I think what would be best to avoid giving an update today and providing an update perhaps at our next meeting after we've had a chance to review the opinion from legal counsel. The last item on our discussion items is the planning board work project review. Each of the members of the board has received a list of those projects with a schedule as to when we might discuss them. Does anybody have any comments on the schedule?
If your schedule is the same as mine, there was an awful lot happening on it tonight.
Yes.
Well, the schedule that you have printed out is generally what the board discussed at a prior meeting, so that the point is dates tentative at the top.
Right. The only thing I think we haven't addressed so far this evening is the conservation subdivision.
And that is still a work in progress.
Still work in process, so it's going to obviously be postponed until after tonight.
Yeah.
Until
yeah,
what?
All this is a, tentative dates and sort of a work program.
Yes.
And
Yeah,
can be changed.
I find the dates helpful because they're all very soon, which means they're all important. Probably in a month or so, the board might want to say, okay, which ones are we going to get hyper-focused on, if you will.
So Tavis, are we still on track to have Steve Randall at next month's work session?
Or is that a public hearing?
That's not a public hearing. What I wanted to do is come back. I've been working with Steve. He's got a couple of irons in the fire right now.
Okay.
Make sure we have the DOT gravel sequenced right and the roadbed details. I'm also trying to glean from DOT what the appropriate cross-section is so we can actually have a figure in the back to go with the tables. If I could make that happen by 5/21, I will bring that back so the board can look at it and say, yes, this is what we believe we talked about and set a public hearing.
All right. Thank you.
You
But it doesn't sound like Steve would have to come to that, would he?
No.
Yeah, okay.
My hope is to try and use him
Yeah.
effectively so he doesn't need to come to another one.
Okay, great.
Yeah, and I see the other thing we didn't get to tonight is the Bay Street Limited Business District.
I literally added that in the course of the last meeting. So I don't know if the board wants to have a subcommittee or just have me meet with Roger and make some of those changes and come back and see what the board thinks. If any of that discussion has changed after some of tonight's feedback. we can look at that as well.
Any comments from the board?
Yes, I sent those things about the Bay Street with the
Yeah.
apartments and all that stuff. Can we make sure that that gets funneled into subcommittee or whatever is going to go on?
So my thought is the survey information that you got will come with the I don't want to say proposed, the hypothetical draft based on the conversation that Roger and I have, just to make sure I heard everything he brought up at the last meeting, and come back with that change, and then have a survey, see if the board agrees generally with that direction.
Yeah, I think that'd be fine, unless anybody has any different opinion. No? Okay. So let's go ahead with the schedule.
Does everybody want to move ahead with that, the Bay Street?
No, I think that it was going to be Roger and Tavis taking a look at it and bringing it to us for consideration.
Yeah, it's kind of left.
I thought I thought we did that last.
Well, we did. I had sort of a preview that Roger was going to suggest removing the apartments on the first floor, but then he added a couple of other things, and I wanted to make sure I had those clearly before it came back and was presented.
All right, the other thing I'd like to get the board's feeling on is how would you feel about having public hearings twice a month rather than just once a month?
Yeah,
So the first,
more convenient for the applicant.
It certainly would be more convenient for the applicant. I just
Right.
wanted to find out what the board thinks about it.
So the only reservation I have is if the work session is to be purely, obviously not tonight, but if generally the work session is to be for the public interaction, information sessions, interchange with the public. I don't want all of a sudden to have a 2-hour public hearing and then hope people hang out for the information session.
Right.
So I think if the board is open to it, and somebody comes in, they happen to miss one particular deadline, but the board has a limited scope for its work session coming up. If the board isn't, I just don't want to offend the board by coming.
Which is what we have been doing.
Yeah, we're just sort of formalizing it, and that we're not going to necessarily publicize that we'll have hearings every time, but we'll be open to having it on an exceptional basis.
Yeah, at the end of '23, it became pretty clear that we were going to have public hearings at the first meeting of the month and work sessions on the second meeting. So that's been the standard. But if the board is open to it for limited projects.
Well, if it happens to fall over, we need, that extra space. The work sessions are not as important, in my mind, as an applicant who needs to get in.
Yeah.
Because we ran out of time here. Well, no, you're next over here. We'll just shove that over.
So, and by the same token, I received one application today, so you will have one public hearing at your May 7th meeting. I don't anticipate it being terribly long. I know I just jinxed it, but I don't anticipate it being a terribly long public hearing. So some of these work session things, if we can get them up, I can put them on the back end of that agenda as well.
Yeah, and try to get through things more quickly.
Yes.
All right. I guess we're not going to have any public comments since everybody's left. So we can go over the minutes. Tavis was kind enough to send them out by email to everybody. This is the minutes of the April 2nd meeting. I have a couple of comments. In the middle of the first page, it says, Doug Breskin stated he happily accepts. I don't remember using the word happily. We'll see how the next year goes.
We all thought you did it happily.
It's hard to write in the minutes about the backflips you were doing.
I'm sorry?
It's hard to get in the minutes the backflips you were doing.
Yes. And then I guess in the middle of the third page, the 7th line from the top, it says, Tavis Austin stated that the item would need, and it ends there. I think you should add a warrant article.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then lastly, at the top of the 4th page, it reads in Peter Goodwin's comments that he stated the board needs to provide housing in town, noting the BOS responsible for systematic capacities. I think it meant system capacities rather than systematic. That's all I have.
All Okay, I have on page 2 at the top, I think what I said was I didn't, well, I know what I didn't say, and that is that commercial districts may require higher residential space. I think what I was trying to say was that maybe we had surplus commercial space and should allow for the conversion of commercial to residential.
I remember you saying that.
And then midway down the page, it says Roger Murray stayed on a short-term rental, which it should say which includes a definition. And then on page 3, about the 4th paragraph up, it should be which the board cannot regulate via zoning ordinances. And on just above 5, public comment, Tavis was unsure about the TRC, but then I think he did produce the information on that the planning board was required.
Yes.
Right.
And then under public, approval of the minutes with corrections, the corrections from the March 19th were on the line just above 3 public hearings. That second sentence, Steve Webster has been appointed. It should read, Steve Webster has been elected a planning board member, and it should delete as John's replacement. And then at the top of page 2, Kathy Barnard stated, not questioned. Then 5th paragraph from the bottom, Roger Murray stated the parking lot has no marked parking spaces. And then Julie corrected that her question had to do with telephone posts, not light posts.
Just a question here, Roger. Didn't we already go through all of this? What are you reading from?
No,
I have my comments on, well, actually, I read that from the correction you made at the March 19th meeting.
Right, but didn't we already move to accept those as corrected?
Yeah, I think Roger's point is that the corrections aren't listed in the minutes.
They usually aren't. These are drafts.
I thought they usually were, but.
Just questioning.
Well, I'll stop.
Yeah, because since the corrections haven't been published yet, then you can go back and get the corrected version and make sure the corrected version was done properly. Then we could bring it up again that it was.
But we never get corrected minutes.
Aren't they on the website? Yeah?
Yeah, that's what I thought, was that they were then put on the website.
Yes.
Yeah. Might take a couple weeks, but they do arrive.
Is that not the case?
That is the case. Some different boards do it differently. There may have been earlier versions where when this person doing minutes first started, the corrections were at the end. They may now be going back and making the changes and then revising the online.
So if Michaela did miss something in the corrections, then Roger, and you picked it up, what is the next step? Would Roger directly go to you and say, oop, there's a problem with the...
That's probably the easiest thing, yes.
And say, oops, there's a typo, let's just fix it, and then republish the corrected one? Okay. Not that you weren't doing a good job, Roger.
All right, does anybody want to make a motion to approve the April 2nd minutes as amended?
So moved.
Second.
Seconded, all in favor?
Aye.
I'd like to make a motion to adjourn the meeting.
Before you do that,
Great.
I'd like to bring to the board's attention that the notice of pre-hearing conference and hearing on the Hart appeal, the pre-hearing conference is scheduled for a week from tomorrow, and the hearing on the merits is scheduled for May 8th, 2024. It does state that in addition to the attorney being present at the pre-hearing conference, the client is to be available by telephone. And how is that being handled?
I will address that with counsel and let you know.
Okay. And then there were supposed to be documents filed 10 days prior to the pre-hearing conference, and I wondered if anything was filed and whether we could get copies of them.
I'm sure we can get copies of everything that was filed, yes.
Okay.
And I believe in that instance, you can go to the Housing Appeals Board and look up the case, and all the materials are there.
Okay.
Okay, so just one other item, but when will we be discussing the multifamily again? Because I think a couple of people brought up some good points.
Mm-hmm.
And so we got it on here for tonight, and then when would be the next time?
Tavis, you said we have one hearing coming up next meeting, so perhaps we can, while it's still fresh in our minds, do it at the next meeting.
Okay. Okay, and then as far as Ann Blodgett's comments about the housing forum, I guess those questions did come up. I tried to address them by putting all of that information online. Anyway, but I think that we're going to be talking about the affordable workforce and inclusionary zoning, and we probably do need some figures.
But Kathy,
how much housing do we need? Do we need, there are differing incomes, and can we get that kind of information?
But Kathy, is it really up to us to say?
Yes, I think
what
it
that
is, because we're
apartment
talking about
costs?
housing.
Yeah, but
so
is
I
that
think
up
it
to
is.
us to say what that guy can charge for his apartment?
No,
No, but
certainly we
honestly,
don't
but-
get to dictate it, but we should have an
Yeah.
idea of what it is so we know what the housing market
Right.
is.
For the market, kind of. But I mean, if what we were just looking at there, if they wanted to change the word from affordable and say luxury,
Well,
there's nothing we can do about that.
No, certainly we can't control it.
We just
for his.
need the information for our information.
Yeah, we can't control what any individual builder or developer
No,
does.
and that's the other thing is.
But we
people keep
can try to guide
talking about,
what kind
you know,
of projects are attracted here
Well,
by how we make the
How
ordinances.
to make the ordinances
Yeah,
right, but you can't make somebody come and build something.
that's right.
You can't make them do that and
I'm
paint
not
that purple.
saying, I'm not talking about that project. I'm just talking about housing in general. If we're going to talk about it, we need to know what are the needs. Is it single family or is it apartments? We need to really put that out so that people understand why we're doing what we're doing. So that's all.
We do have the 2023 Lakes Region housing needs.
No, I know, and so that information is easily available, but not at a public hearing. We, probably need to bring that up at next time we talk about housing.
To present that information to the public.
Yeah.
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 So, and then from that, the 24 housing analysis that the board has talked about, the numbers weren't quite represented tonight. It's not 300 units a year for 10 years. It's some 300 units in the next 20 years. And then it suggested of those, 180 of them or so should be affordable or workforce specifically.
But what everybody tried not to say tonight, every time you say workforce and affordable, and then you say you want it the lower income, that's all subsidized.
No, it is not.
When they start building that sort of stuff, the guys that are building, paying are extra.
Yeah, there are people,
do that.
developers that do that.
There are
That's
a few,
true.
yeah. But generally, we keep hearing from these people that it would cost them more to build to those specifications than to build to market specifications and let the market balance
Well,
itself.
the problem is the unit costs exactly the same to build. You're just not able to gain as much from it.
Right.
So that's where the subsidy sort of comes in. Without an incentive program,
Well, we just heard that couple words from one of the people that said, oh, and if we, do the subsidized housing, you can make the units smaller.
No, you can't.
And it just clicked in my head like, is
well,
that a good thing?
But if you look at the inclusionary zoning, it says the units have to be comparable.
So before we get ahead of ourselves, I don't think we're prepared to have this whole discussion tonight.
No, well,
So-
I was just bringing it up as
No,
something. we needed.
you're valid to bring up
being
a point. I just don't want to
really
get into too much of a debate tonight.
Yeah, okay.
I just have one other thing, and at the last meeting, Kathy stepped down as chair of the board, and I think everyone owes her a real debt of gratitude. I think she did an exceptional job as the chair. The meetings she ran were fair, even-handed, and orderly, and I think we're indebted to her for doing that for those many years.
I'll second that, Roger.
I'll third it.
All in favor?
Here, here.
Thank you very much.
Sorry we didn't bring cake.
If you're ready, I'll second your motion to adjourn if we're ready now.
Very good.
Before I say anything more,
All those in favor?
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Thank you.
Somebody doesn't have a project.